Right, so we're going to talk about the water cycle first. The first process is going to be evaporation. So that is when liquid water from oceans, from bodies of water, turn into water vapor as it enters the atmosphere. So the process of evaporation releases water vapor to the atmosphere when liquid water changes to gas. Next, we have transpiration. So, transpiration is evaporation as it occurs to plants. So, we have plants that absorb water from its roots. As the water moves up into the leaves of plants, eventually it's going to evaporate back into the atmosphere. So, essentially, transpiration is the process of evaporation as it happens with plants specifically. Next, we have condensation. So, when water vapor is already in the atmosphere, eventually it will condense and clouds can form in the atmosphere. So, the process of condensation occurs as clouds are formed in the atmosphere. Precipitation is when now our clouds are going to eventually turn back into liquid water, and liquid water is going to fall to Earth's surface in the form of precipitation. So we have snow, we have rain, we have hail and sleet. These are all examples of precipitation. So as water falls down to Earth's surface, it's going to eventually percolate through the soil. So percolation is when water travels through the soil underground. So once it goes through the soil underground, it's going to be stored in what we call aquifers for long periods of time. So groundwater is any water that is stored underground in aquifers. So nowadays, if we ever need to use a well to pump out water, we are taking the water that is stored in aquifers as groundwater. So sometimes not all water will percolate due to the fact that there might be some surfaces that are not permeable, such as buildings, concrete, pavement. A lot of that is not going to be directly permeable. So when that happens, we have increased runoff. And runoff is when water travels eventually into bodies of water, not through percolation. So eventually it just falls into bodies of water by just simply running off. All right. After the water cycle, we have the carbon cycle. So, in the carbon cycle, there are several biological processes that carry out the different either release or storage of carbon dioxide. So, the only process that can absorb carbon dioxide from the atmosphere is photosynthesis. So, the only organisms that can carry out this process are plants. And that is why plants are important to us because they are the only organisms capable of removing excess carbon dioxide from the atmosphere. The opposite process of photosynthesis is going to be respiration. So keep in mind, several organisms are capable of carrying out respiration. First, you have animals. Humans are animals. Then you have decomposers. Decomposers are organisms that feed specifically on dead organisms. So you have fungi or you have bacteria. So these are examples of decomposers. When they feed on dead organisms, they will go through respiration to release carbon dioxide. And lastly, you have plants. So plants can actually go through both photosynthesis and respiration. However, they photosynthesize at a greater rate than they go through respiration. So technically, they are absorbing carbon dioxide a lot faster than they are releasing carbon dioxide. So, as these plants and animals that contain carbon die over time, fossil fuels can be formed from the remains of these dead organisms. So these dead organisms are going to eventually fossilize. And then over time, due to sedimentation, we have our formation of fossil fuels. So keep in mind the formation of fossil fuels occurs at the very, very, very bottom. So if you look at this picture here, you have ancient plants and then marine organisms that make up coal and oil, two of the three fossil fuels that we regularly use today. So when we use these fossil fuels, how does carbon dioxide return back into the atmosphere, knowing that this is supposed to be a cycle? So, what we do is we combust or burn some of these fossil fuels. And through the process of combustion, carbon dioxide is released right back into the atmosphere. So, fossil fuels take millions of years to form, but so quick for carbon dioxide to be released again, because once we burn them, as we use them, we're releasing carbon dioxide right away. All right. The third one is going to be nitrogen. So, nitrogen is an element with the atomic symbol N, and nitrogen is found in many living organisms. Proteins, they're building blocks of many organisms, DNA, genetic material for all living organisms, and nitrogen is also found in the atmosphere as nitrogen gas. So, if we take a look at some of these chemical formulas, N2, which you'll see frequently, is the chemical formula for nitrogen gas. So, this is found in the atmosphere. NH3 or NH4 plus are chemical formulas for both ammonia for NH3 and ammonium for NH4 plus. And then lastly, you have nitrites, which is NO2 minus, or NO3 minus, which are nitrates. So keep in mind, N2, nitrogen gas, we have an abundance of nitrogen gas. However, not all of it is going to be usable. Nitrates, NO3 minus, is the most usable form of nitrogen for plants as it enters the biosphere. So, if we look at the nitrogen cycle, 78% of Earth's atmosphere is made up of nitrogen. However, because atmospheric nitrogen is not readily usable, we need to quote unquote fix that nitrogen. So, through the process of nitrogen fixation, soil bacteria carry out this process to convert nitrogen gas into ammonia. So, ammonia, NH3, NH4 plus, which is ammonium, is the first form of nitrogen that it gets converted to in the nitrogen cycle. So now that we have our ammonia and ammonium underground, once again, the soil bacteria are going to convert that to nitrites and nitrates. So the process of nitrification is when ammonia and ammonium convert, or ammonia, ammonium are converted to nitrites and nitrates. So we want nitrates. Nitrates are the most usable forms of nitrogen for plants. So now that we have our nitrates, plants are going to absorb some of that through the process of assimilation. So since nitrates are found in the soil, plants are going to absorb some of that um, into their roots. And this is the process of assimilation. So it's a good thing because plants do need nitrates. And eventually, when animals feed on the plants, they're able to obtain the nitrates. Lastly, since this is a cycle, the nitrates are going to be converted back into atmospheric nitrogen gas. So the process that converts nitrates back into nitrogen gas is known as denitrification. So denitrification, soil bacteria also carry out this process, converts our nitrates back to atmospheric nitrogen gas. So just to review the nitrogen cycle really quick, there are four different processes. Nitrogen fixation, going from nitrogen gas to ammonia and ammonia. Then we have nitrification, which converts the ammonium and ammonia into nitrites and nitrates. Then, since plants can use the nitrates, plants will take in the nitrates through their roots in the process of assimilation. And then lastly, any nitrates that are not absorbed by plants will then get cycled back into the atmosphere through the process of denitrification. So keep in mind, most of the nitrogen cycle occurs underground and carried out by soil bacteria. Lastly, we have our phosphorus cycle. So sorry, compared to the other cycles, which all have a atmospheric component, carbon found as carbon dioxide, nitrogen found as nitrogen gas, phosphorus does not have an atmospheric component. It is, however, found in the geosphere, so that's land on Earth, hydrosphere in bodies of water, and then the biosphere found in living organisms. So, similar to nitrates, phosphorus is also a key component of living organisms and their DNA. So, how do the phosphates first get released into the geosphere and the biosphere? So, the first thing that happens is we have our phosphates stored in rocks. So, the weathering of rocks caused by precipitation will contribute to the release of phosphates. So, the phosphates, which is a form of phosphorus that is found in the phosphorus cycle, will either enter soils or it can enter bodies of water. So we talk about the soil first. What happens here is the phosphates are already in soil. Eventually, it's going to be absorbed into the roots of plants, just like how plants can absorb nitrates. And then eventually, when animals consume the plant, animals will also have phosphates. So, phosphate is also found in our DNA. And when animals consume plants, they now have phosphates. Over time, when our plants and animals die, decomposers will break down our once living plants and animals. So the phosphates that were once stored in both the plants and animals will get released back into the soil. So this is the whole cycle. Once it's in the soil, it can be absorbed again and then enter living organisms. And when they die, it gets released back into the soil. Next, on the other hand, weathering of rocks can also directly release phosphates into bodies of water. So there are three ways that phosphates can enter bodies of water without the use of living organisms. So first way is just weathering. So weathering of rocks, we're breaking down rocks, releasing phosphates. It can be carried into bodies of water. Human activities. So when humans use fertilizers, especially on farmland, this can also cause fertilizer runoff, and phosphates can eventually run off into bodies of water. And then lastly, when water flows through the soil underground, sometimes there are phosphates found in the soil. So the phosphorus can leach into the groundwater that is stored underground. So now that phosphates are in the bodies of water, it's known as dissolved phosphates. Over time, these dissolved phosphates are going to sink all the way to the bottom of the ocean. Through the process of sedimentation, sedimentary rock can be formed. So keep in mind, sedimentary rock can still contain phosphorus. And then over a long, long period of time, we have geological uplift. So this is a natural process, the formation of new rock from the sedimentary rock at the bottom of the ocean. So geological uplift can eventually bring some of this sedimentary rock back to the surface. So keep in mind, geological uplift is a very, very, very long process in the phosphorus cycle.